The throne room stretched out like it could swallow an entire city block. The walls were carved from this weird black stone that seemed to eat up all the light around it. Jake Miller stood somewhere near the back of the crowd, trying his best to blend in with the decorative pillars while his parents did their diplomat thing up front. He was 12 years old and bored out of his skull. His mom and dad were Earth's lead negotiators, which sounded way cooler than it actually was. Mostly it meant standing around in fancy rooms while aliens who could barely hide their disgust talked about trade agreements and shipping routes. The Galactic Empire had only made contact with Earth 3 years ago, and it was pretty clear they thought humans were about as important as ants at a picnic. Jake had begged to stay on the ship. He could have been playing games or reading or literally anything else. But no, his parents insisted he come along to learn about interstellar diplomacy. So far, all he'd learned was that diplomacy was incredibly boring. The Emperor guy was going on and on about tariffs or something. He was huge, like 9 feet tall, wearing these robes that kept changing colors like someone had spilled oil on silk. His voice boomed across the room, and all the other aliens nodded along like he was saying the most fascinating stuff in the universe. Jake checked his watch. They'd been here for 2 hours. 2 hours of standing still and pretending to pay attention. That's when he noticed a side corridor that nobody seemed to be watching. The guards were all focused on the throne, and his parents were too busy taking notes to notice him. Jake took a slow step backward, then another, until he slipped into the hallway. Freedom. He wandered through corridors that seemed to go on forever, each one bigger than the last. The palace was insane. Back home in Colorado, their entire apartment building could fit in one of these hallways. The walls had these glowing patterns that shifted when you walked past them, and the ceiling was so high up he couldn't even see it properly. After a few minutes of exploring, Jake found what looked like a courtyard. Except calling it a courtyard was like calling the Grand Canyon a ditch. It was massive, filled with plants that definitely weren't from Earth. Purple grass, trees with silver leaves that made tinkling sounds in the wind, and flowers that seemed to glow from the inside. That's when things got interesting. A sound came from somewhere behind a cluster of those weird trees. Low, rumbling, angry. Jake froze, every muscle in his body suddenly alert. Something emerged from the shadows. It was huge. 6 legs, each one thick as a tree trunk, moved with predatory grace. Its body was covered in what looked like crystals growing right out of its skin, sharp and gleaming. But it was the eyes that got Jake's attention. 4 of them, arranged in pairs, all locked onto him with an intelligence that made his mouth go dry. This wasn't just some animal. This thing was smart. It was thinking. Jake's brain screamed at him to run, but his legs wouldn't move. The creature took a step closer, its claws clicking on the stone ground. It was crouched low, muscles bunched up like it was about to pounce. Suddenly, the courtyard flooded with noise. Armored guards burst in from every direction, carrying weapons that hummed with energy. Aliens in fancy clothes appeared on balconies above, pointing and shouting. And then the Emperor himself strode out, his color-changing robes swirling dramatically. When Emperor Malthouse saw Jake standing there with the creature stalking toward him, he started laughing. Not a friendly laugh either. This was the kind of laugh a villain does in movies right before something really bad happens. Well, how delightful. The Emperor's voice carried across the entire courtyard. A human child about to become lunch for our most troublesome beast. More aliens gathered to watch. Jake could see them on balconies, peeking through doorways, all of them waiting to see him get torn apart. His heart was hammering so hard he could hear it in his ears. The Emperor raised his arms like he was making some grand announcement. Tell you what, little human? If you can tame that predator, I'll give you this entire planet. Every mountain, every ocean, every city yours. How's that sound? The crowd erupted in laughter. They thought it was hilarious. The Emperor was making jokes while Jake was about to die. But Jake wasn't paying attention to them anymore. He was watching the creature. It had gotten closer, close enough that he could hear its breathing. Rough, harsh, painful. One of its crystal spines looked darker than the others, and the area around it was swollen. Jake had spent 3 years volunteering at the Rocky Mountain Animal Rescue back home. Every Saturday he'd help out with whatever animals they brought in. Dogs that had been abused, cats that were feral, even a bear cub once. He'd learned to read animals, to see past the aggression to what was really going on. And this creature? It wasn't trying to hunt him. It was hurting. Wait, Jake said, his voice coming out quieter than he meant it to. He cleared his throat and tried again. Just, give me a second. The Emperor leaned forward, intrigued. He waved his guards back with one hand. By all means, child. Let's see how you die. Slowly if you prefer entertainment value. Jake ignored him. Slowly, carefully, he lowered himself down until he was kneeling on the ground. He made himself small, non-threatening. This was the first thing they taught him at the rescue center. Never make yourself look like a threat. He kept his eyes on the creature's shoulder instead of looking directly at its face. Direct eye contact meant challenge, meant fight. He didn't want to fight. "Hey there, big guy," Jake said softly, using the same voice he'd used with Duke, the pit bull that had been beaten so badly he'd attack anything that moved. "Yeah, you're scary looking. I get it. But I'm not here to hurt you, okay?" The creature paused. Its head tilted slightly like it was confused. The courtyard had gone completely silent. Every alien watching held their breath. Jake kept talking, kept his voice low and calm. "You're hurting, aren't you? Something's wrong. I can see it. That dark spot on your side, that's infected or something, isn't it?" The creature took another step closer. Jake's instincts screamed at him to run, to move, to do anything. But he stayed still. "I can help," he whispered. "I've helped lots of animals before. Dogs, cats, even a raccoon once. You're bigger, sure, but pain is pain, right? And I bet you're tired of hurting." The creature's growl softened. It wasn't exactly friendly, but it wasn't aggressive anymore either. It sounded almost questioning, like the creature was asking if Jake was serious. Jake slowly extended one hand, palm up, fingers relaxed. "Yeah, I'm serious. But you gotta trust me, okay? Just a little bit." For a moment, nothing happened. The whole courtyard seemed to freeze in time. Then the creature, this massive predator that had apparently killed a bunch of guards, lowered its enormous head and took one careful step forward. Its nose touched Jake's palm. Someone in the crowd gasped. The Emperor stopped laughing. And Jake let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding, feeling the creature's warm breath on his hand and thinking that maybe, just maybe, he'd found something way more interesting than any boring diplomatic meeting. Jake didn't leave that courtyard for 3 whole days. His parents lost their minds at first. His mom came rushing in about an hour after everything started, looking ready to drag him away by his ear. But then she saw him sitting cross-legged next to the creature, both of them just existing in the same space, and something in her expression changed. His dad showed up right behind her with a tablet full of angry diplomatic notes, took one look at the scene and slowly lowered the tablet. The Emperor decided to let it continue. He treated the whole thing like it was his personal entertainment channel. He had cameras set up everywhere, broadcasting the footage across the entire Empire's network. Millions of aliens on thousands of worlds were watching a human kid try to befriend their most dangerous predator. Jake named her Crystal because of those shards growing out of her spine. He figured she was a girl based on her build and the way she moved. He'd learned enough about animals to make educated guesses about that sort of thing. That first night was rough. Crystal wouldn't let him get close to the infected area. Every time he tried to move toward her left side, she'd growl and shift away. So Jake just sat there talking to her about random stuff. He told her about his golden retriever back home named Buddy. Told her about his little sister Katie, who was probably thrilled to have their parents' full attention for once. Told her about the mountains near Denver and how the air smelled different up there. Crystal listened. Jake could tell she was actually listening, not just tolerating his presence. Her eyes followed him when he moved, and her ears, or whatever those crystal-plated things were, would twitch toward him when he spoke. The Imperial doctor, this spindly alien named Vex with too many arms, brought medical supplies at the Emperor's command. He dropped them on the ground like he was delivering explosives and backed away fast. "The creature will tear you apart the moment you attempt treatment," Vex said, his voice all high-pitched and worried. "I've seen what these beasts can do. 17 guards dead in the past month." Jake looked at Crystal, who was watching Vex with obvious distrust. "Yeah, well, maybe they deserved it." That got everyone's attention real quick. "Excuse me?" The Emperor's voice came from one of the balconies above. Jake stood up, looking up at the towering figure. "I mean, look at her. Someone put a tracking chip in her. A big one by the looks of it. And they didn't do it carefully. That thing is infected and poisoning her. She's been in pain for weeks, maybe months. So yeah, when guards came after her, she defended herself. Wouldn't you?" The Emperor stared down at him for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he smiled. Not the cruel smile from before, but something that might have been respect. Interesting perspective, human child. On the second day, Jake started sharing his food with Crystal. He had protein bars from Earth in his pack, the kind with peanut butter and chocolate chips. Crystal sniffed them suspiciously, her nose wrinkling at the unfamiliar smell. But eventually she tried one. Her reaction was hilarious. She made this confused snorting sound and shook her head, but then she ate the whole thing. "Yeah, they're kind of gross," Jake agreed. "But when you're hungry they do the job." He noticed the aliens watching from the balconies were changing. At first, it was just Imperial nobles treating it like a show. But now there were others. Green-skinned people wearing simpler clothes, their expressions different. Hopeful maybe. Desperate. These were the Verdans, Jake realized. The original people of this planet before the Empire conquered it. They were watching him like he was doing something impossible, something that mattered way beyond just one kid and one creature. That second night, Crystal finally let him touch the infected area. Jake moved slowly, telegraphing every motion. He kept talking the whole time, his voice steady even though his hands were shaking. Okay girl. I'm just gonna look. That's all. Just a quick look to see what we're dealing with. His fingers brushed against the crystal plating around the wound. It was hot to the touch, way hotter than the rest of her body. The crystals there had turned almost black and he could see swelling underneath. When he pressed gently, Crystal whimpered. Actually whimpered, this massive deadly predator making a sound like a hurt puppy. I know. I'm sorry. But I gotta see how bad it is. There, embedded deep in her flesh, was the tracking device. It was Imperial tech, he could tell from the markings. Someone had shoved it into her body without anesthesia, without care, without any concern for the pain it would cause. And now it was killing her from the inside. Jake felt anger burning in his chest. White hot and righteous. What kind of people did this? What kind of empire thought this was okay? He looked up at the cameras, knowing millions were watching. This is what your empire did to her. You heard her first. She's only dangerous because you made her that way. The third day was when everything changed. Jake woke up at dawn with Crystal's massive head resting near his leg. She'd slept close to him, trusting him enough to be vulnerable. That trust meant everything. Today's the day, he told her. We're gonna get that thing out of you. It's gonna hurt and I'm really sorry about that. But after it's done you'll feel so much better. I promise. Vex brought proper surgical tools this time, along with antiseptics and painkillers. The painkillers won't work on her biology, he warned. She's going to feel everything. Then I better be fast, Jake said. The crowd that gathered was huge. It seemed like half the palace had come to watch. Jake tried to ignore them, focusing only on Crystal. He spent an hour preparing, cleaning the area as best he could, talking to Crystal the whole time. Remember Duke? The dog I told you about? He'd been hurt real bad and he was so scared of people that he'd bite anyone who came close. But we worked with him, spent months earning his trust. Eventually he let us help him. And you know what? He got adopted by this amazing family. He's probably lying on a couch right now, living his best life. Crystal's eyes stayed locked on his face. Jake picked up the surgical tool, his hand steadier than he expected. This is like that, okay? It's gonna hurt but then it gets better. You just gotta trust me for a few more minutes. He began. Crystal's entire body went rigid. Her claws dug into the stone, leaving deep gouges. A sound came from her throat that Jake had never heard before, something between a roar and a cry of pain. Every person watching took a step back. The guards raised their weapons. But Jake kept working. His hands moved carefully, precisely the way the vet had shown him during his training. Find the edges of the device, loosen the surrounding tissue, don't rush. Sweat dripped into his eyes. His shoulders ached from tension. And Crystal was shaking, her whole massive body trembling with pain. Almost there, girl. Almost. You're doing so good. So good. 20 minutes felt like 20 hours. But finally, Jake felt the device come loose. He pulled it free, this chunk of metal and circuitry covered in infected tissue and blood. He dropped it on the ground and immediately started cleaning the wound, applying the antiseptic, working fast before Crystal's pain tolerance ran out. Done, he breathed. It's done. You're free. Crystal made a sound Jake had never heard from her before. A deep, rumbling purr that vibrated through the ground. She pressed her enormous head against his chest, nearly knocking him over, and that purr got even louder. Jake wrapped his arms around her neck as far as they would go, feeling tears on his face and not caring who saw. From the balcony, a Verdan voice shouted, "The human child has done it. He's freed the Thornback." The crowd erupted. Not in fear this time but in something that sounded almost like hope. And Jake, exhausted and covered in Crystal's blood, looked up at the Emperor and smiled. The morning after Jake removed the tracking device, he walked into the throne room with Crystal following behind him like an oversized puppy. Every step they took together echoed through the massive chamber. Nobles and guards scattered out of their way, pressing themselves against the walls. Some of them looked terrified. Others looked fascinated. A few looked angry. Emperor Maltose sat on his throne, watching them approach with an expression Jake couldn't quite read. The ruler's color-changing robes had gone dark, almost black, which Jake figured probably wasn't a good sign. Crystal stayed close to Jake's side, her movements calm and controlled. She wasn't being aggressive, wasn't showing her teeth or growling. She just walked alongside him like they'd been partners their whole lives. When they reached the base of the throne, Jake stopped. The silence in the room was so complete he could hear his own heartbeat. "You said if I tamed the predator, I could have this planet," Jake said. His voice didn't shake, which surprised him. "Well, I did it. So I'm here to accept your offer." The throne room exploded into chaos. Nobles started shouting in a dozen different languages. Guards reached for their weapons. Advisors rushed toward the emperor, all talking at once. One alien in fancy robes actually fainted, which would have been funny under different circumstances. The emperor raised one hand and everyone went silent immediately. That kind of power was intimidating, Jake had to admit. "That was a joke," Malthouse said slowly, his voice dangerous and quiet. "Surely you understand that, human child." "A jest. Entertainment for my court." "Was it?" Jake pulled out a small tablet his dad had given him that morning. Because according to imperial law, specifically the Code of Sovereign Declarations, any offer made by the emperor in public, witnessed by his court and broadcast across imperial channels, is legally binding. And you broadcast our whole conversation to millions of worlds. He'd spent half the night studying imperial law with his parents. His mom was a contracts lawyer before she became a diplomat, and she'd found the exact statute. His dad had helped him understand the political implications. They'd both looked exhausted and stressed, but also kind of proud. An advisor stepped forward, his multiple eyes narrowing. "The boy is correct, Your Eminence. The wager was public, witnessed, and recorded. By our own laws it is binding." Malthouse stood up from his throne, his full 9-foot height making Jake feel tiny. But Jake held his ground. Crystal pressed against his leg, offering silent support. "You dare quote my own laws to me?" The Emperor's voice could have frozen fire. "I'm not trying to disrespect you," Jake said honestly. "But you made a promise. And where I come from, promises matter. If your word doesn't mean anything, how can anyone trust you?" That hit something. Jake could see it in the way the Emperor's expression shifted, in how some of the nobles suddenly looked uncomfortable. Trust and honor were apparently big deals in the Empire, even if they didn't always practice it. From somewhere in the crowd, a voice called out. It was Verdun, one of the green-skinned natives. "The human speaks truth. We witnessed the Emperor's words." Other Verduns joined in, their voices growing stronger. They'd been silent for so long under Imperial rule, but now they were speaking up. Jake could see guards moving toward them, but the Emperor held up his hand again. "Silence," Malthouse commanded. Everyone obeyed, but Jake could feel the tension in the air. Something had shifted. Something important. The Emperor stared down at Jake for what felt like forever. Then, surprisingly, he smiled. Not his cruel smile, but something calculating. "Very well, human child. You've proven yourself clever as well as brave. I will honor my wager, but with conditions." Jake's stomach tightened. "Here it comes. You will rule this planet for 1 standard year. That's about 13 of your Earth months. Keep order. Maintain peace. Prove you can actually govern a world. If you succeed, I will formally grant Verdun its independence. If you fail, if there is chaos or rebellion or economic collapse, this world returns to Imperial control. And you, Jake Miller, will learn what happens to those who embarrass emperors." The throne room went dead quiet again. Jake's mind raced. A year was a long time. A lot could go wrong. But looking around at the Verduns watching him with desperate hope in their eyes, he knew he couldn't back down. "I accept your terms," Jake said. "But I want one thing clear. I'm not here to rule anyone. I'm here to help the Verduns govern themselves." "Semantics," the Emperor waved dismissively. "The responsibility is yours regardless. Do we have an agreement?" Jake looked at Crystal, who bumped her head against his hand. He thought about all the animals at the rescue center that everyone said were too broken to save. He thought about Duke, the pit bull who'd found his forever home. Sometimes things that seemed impossible just needed someone willing to try. "Yeah," Jake said. "We have an agreement." The news spread faster than Jake could have imagined. Within hours, every planet in the Empire knew what happened. A 12-year-old human kid had claimed an entire world from the Emperor through a legal loophole and a moment of compassion. Back on Earth, Jake's face was everywhere. News channels, social media, everywhere. His little sister Katie called him crying because kids at her school kept asking for his autograph. His old friends from the rescue center were blowing up his messages. The whole planet was losing its mind. But Jake didn't have time to think about fame. He had a planet to help. The Verdans held an emergency gathering in the capital city's main square. Thousands of them showed up, more than Jake had ever seen in one place. They looked at him with hope and fear mixed together, like they couldn't quite believe this was real. An elderly Verdan woman named Thora stepped forward. She wore traditional robes that the Empire had tried to ban, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You gave us our world back," she said, her voice shaking. "No," Jake said quickly, uncomfortable with the praise. "This was always your world. I just made the Empire acknowledge it." "What happens now?" another Verdan asked. "Do you have a plan?" Jake hesitated. Honestly, he had no idea what he was doing. He was 12. He'd never run a planet before. He barely managed to keep his room clean back home. But then he remembered what his dad always said. "When you don't know what to do, ask the people who do." "I think the people who should govern Verdan are Verdans," Jake said. "So here's what I'm thinking. We form a council. You pick representatives from every region, every community. They make the decisions. I'm just here to help if you need it and to make sure the Empire honors their agreement." The crowd murmured, the sound rippling through thousands of people. Thora looked at him with something like wonder. "You would give us our own government? True authority? It's not mine to give. It's yours. It always was." That's when something beautiful happened. The Verdans started singing. Jake didn't understand the words, but he understood the emotion. It was a song of freedom, of hope, of a people remembering who they used to be before the Empire came. Crystal sat beside him and Jake scratched behind her crystal-plated ear. His parents stood nearby, his mom wiping tears from her eyes, his dad recording everything on his tablet. Over the next week, Earth sent support. Not weapons or soldiers, but teachers and engineers and doctors. People who wanted to help rebuild a world. The rescue center back home even sent a team of animal behavior specialists to help protect and study the thornbacks. Other conquered worlds started paying attention. The footage of Jake and Crystal, of the Verdans singing their freedom song, spread across the galaxy. On 17 different planets, people started asking questions. The Verdan could be free, why not them? In his flagship orbiting a distant world, Emperor Maltose watched the reports with growing concern. His military advisors urged him to crush the movement before it spread further. But something held him back. That human child had done something Maltose didn't think was possible. He'd taken a world not through force, not through military might, but through compassion and clever use of the Empire's own laws. And now that world was thriving in ways it never had under Imperial rule. It was frustrating. It was confusing. And it was deeply, deeply interesting. The Emperor made a decision. He would go to Verdan personally. He needed to see this experiment up close. He needed to understand how a child with no army, no weapons, and no experience could accomplish what he'd spent centuries doing through force. And maybe, just maybe, he needed to understand what it meant when people chose to follow you instead of being forced to obey. 3 weeks after the agreement, everything fell apart. Jake was in the middle of helping set up new schools when Thora burst into the room, her face tight with panic. The Verdan Council had been meeting all morning, and from the look on her face, the news wasn't good. "There's a storm coming," she said, her hands shaking. "A crystal tempest. The biggest one in 15 years. Jake had heard about these storms. The Verdans talked about them in hushed voices, like they were talking about monsters from childhood nightmares. Winds strong enough to strip flesh from bone, electrical discharges that could fry anything electronic, and crystal shards that flew through the air like bullets. "Okay," Jake said, trying to stay calm. "What's the evacuation plan?" Thora's expression crumbled. "There isn't one. We used to have storm shelters, underground facilities built by our ancestors. But the Empire dismantled them all 15 years ago. They said the shelters could be used as rebel hideouts." Jake felt cold. "How many people are in the danger zone?" 50,000. Maybe more. "The coastal cities will be completely exposed." Her voice broke. "Under Imperial rule, they would just evacuate their personnel and leave us to die. They called it acceptable losses." Jake's mind raced. 50,000 people. They had less than a day before the storm hit. No shelters, no protection, nowhere to go. His dad appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand, looking grim. "I just got the meteorological data. The storm hits in 18 hours. Son, even with Earth's best emergency response, we couldn't evacuate that many people in time." "Then we don't evacuate them," Jake said. "We protect them." "How?" "We rebuild the shelters." Everyone stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "Jake, honey," his mom said gently, "that's impossible. It took the Verdans decades to build those facilities originally. We have 18 hours. So we better get started. Jake called an emergency meeting in the Capitol Square. Verdans flooded in, along with the Earth volunteers and even some of the Imperial observers who'd been stationed to watch the experiment. General Crane, the Emperor's military representative, stood at the back with his arms crossed, clearly expecting this whole thing to collapse. Jake stood on a platform, Crystal beside him, and addressed the crowd. "I know you're all scared," he started. "I am too. But here's what I learned back home at the animal rescue. When something seems impossible, you break it down into small pieces. We can't build perfect storm shelters in 18 hours. But we can build something. And something is better than nothing." He pulled up the old Verdan shelter designs on a holographic display. "We have the plants. We have construction equipment from Earth. We have thousands of people willing to work. What we need is coordination." A Verdan engineer stood up, an older man with scars on his hands. "I helped build the original shelters. I remember the designs." Another voice called out, "I used to work construction before the conquest. I can organize teams." More people stood up. Electricians, welders, equipment operators, teachers who could coordinate supplies, cooks who could feed the workers. Even some of the Earth volunteers who had engineering backgrounds joined in. General Crane stepped forward, his expression skeptical. "This is foolishness. Even with your combined efforts, the task is impossible. You'll only get people killed trying." Jake looked at him steadily. "Then help us. You've got Imperial technology, Imperial resources. If you really think we're going to fail anyway, what difference does it make if you help?" The general's expression flickered with something that might have been surprise. After a long moment, he tapped his communicator. "All Imperial personnel in the sector, this is General Crane. Divert all non-essential equipment to the construction sites." "That's an order." The work began. Jake had never seen anything like it. Verdans who'd been strangers before worked side by side, sharing tools and knowledge. Earth engineers adapted the ancient designs with modern materials. Imperial heavy equipment, grudgingly provided by Crane's forces, carved into the ground at speeds Jake didn't think were possible. Crystal and her family showed up too. 3 other Thornbacks had emerged from the wilderness after seeing Crystal with Jake, and now all 4 of them used their massive claws to dig and clear debris. They worked harder than any machine, moving tons of earth in minutes. Jake coordinated everything from a command center they'd set up in an old warehouse. His mom handled logistics, tracking supplies and where they needed to go. His dad managed communications, keeping all the work sites connected. Thora and the council organized the Verdan workers, making sure everyone knew what needed to happen and when. The hours blurred together. Jake survived on protein bars and energy drinks his dad kept shoving into his hands. His eyes burned from staring at screens. His voice went hoarse from shouting instructions over the noise of construction. At hour 12 they'd completed 3 shelters. They needed 15. At hour 14 Jake started to panic. They weren't going to make it. He'd been too optimistic, too naive. 50,000 people were going to die because a 12-year-old kid thought he could save them. His mom found him sitting with his head in his hands, Crystal lying beside him. "We're not going to finish in time," Jake whispered. "Maybe not," she admitted. "But look what you've already done." She pulled up live footage from the construction sites. Thousands of people working together, Verdans and humans and even Imperial personnel, all focused on the same goal. Saving lives. "That general who said you'd fail? He's out there right now, coordinating his troops to help with the electrical systems. The Imperial workers are volunteering overtime. And the Verdans, Jake. They're working like I've never seen people work before. You did that. You showed them what was possible." Jake wiped his eyes and stood up. "Then let's finish this." The last 4 hours were brutal. Everyone was exhausted, running on pure determination. But something magical happened around hour 16. More people showed up. Verdans from other cities who'd heard what was happening. They brought supplies, tools, fresh workers to replace the ones who couldn't continue. The shelters went up faster. At hour 17 Shelter 12 was completed. Then 13. The storm was visible on the horizon now, a wall of darkness and swirling crystal that stretched from ground to sky. 14 shelters finished. 1 more to go. The workers at Site 15 were moving like their lives depended on it because they did. Jake was there personally, helping carry supplies, holding lights, doing whatever needed to be done. Crystal dug alongside the other Thornbacks, their crystal spines glowing in the dimming light. 30 minutes before the storm hit, the last shelter was finished. Not pretty, not perfect, but solid. Safe. The evacuation was chaotic but organized. 50,000 people flooded into the shelters, families clutching each other, people helping strangers carry their belongings. Jake stood at the entrance of the largest shelter, helping guide people in, checking off names on a tablet to make sure everyone was accounted for. The wind was already picking up, howling across the city with terrifying force. "That's everyone," Thora shouted over the noise. "Jake, we need to get inside now." Jake took one last look at the approaching storm. It was massive, beautiful in a terrible way, nature at its most powerful and indifferent. Then Crystal nudged him toward the shelter entrance, and they all rushed inside. The storm hit like the end of the world. Even underground they could hear it. The roar of wind, the crack of crystal shards hitting the surface, the boom of electrical discharges. The shelter shook but held. The lights flickered but stayed on. 50,000 people huddled together in the darkness, listening to the storm rage above them. And when it finally passed 12 hours later, they emerged to find their cities damaged but standing. And not a single person had died. General Crane approached Jake as they surveyed the aftermath. The military officer looked tired, but something in his expression had changed. "I need to file my report with the Emperor," Crane said. "I'm going to tell him that a human child mobilized an entire planet in less than a day and saved 50,000 lives using nothing but cooperation and determination." "What do you think he'll say?" Jake asked. "I think," Crane said slowly, "he's going to realize that everything he thought he knew about power is wrong." 2 months after the storm, Emperor Maltose returned to Verdun. Jake was in the middle of teaching a group of kids about animal behavior when the Imperial flagship appeared in the sky. It was impossible to miss, this massive ship that seemed to block out the sun. Crystal raised her head, her crystal spines bristling with tension. The whole planet seemed to hold its breath. Jake's parents found him within minutes, both looking stressed. His dad's hair was sticking up in every direction, which meant he'd been running his hands through it. That was never a good sign. "The Emperor's here," his mom said unnecessarily. "He wants to meet with you. With the council. With everyone basically." "Is he ending the agreement early?" Jake asked, his stomach dropping. They still had 7 months left. 7 months to prove that freedom worked better than conquest. "We don't know. He wouldn't say why he's here." The meeting took place in the rebuilt Central Plaza, where thousands of Verdans had gathered. It reminded Jake of that first day when he told them about forming a council. Except now the city looked different. New buildings mixed with repaired old ones. Gardens growing where there used to be Imperial military stations. Kids playing in parks that had been restricted zones. Emperor Maltose arrived without the usual fanfare. No ceremonial robes, no army of guards. Just him and General Crane, walking through the crowd like normal people. Well, as normal as a 9-foot-tall alien emperor could look. The Verdans parted to let them through, silent and watchful. Maltose stopped in front of Jake, studying him with those alien eyes that seemed to see everything. Then, surprisingly, he looked around at the city, really looked at it. "This is not what I expected," the Emperor said finally. "What did you expect?" Thora asked from her position beside Jake. "Chaos. Conflict. The inevitable collapse that comes when primitive species try to govern themselves." Maltose gestured at the bustling plaza, at the Verdans going about their business, at the children playing near a fountain. "Instead I find order. Prosperity. Happiness." General Crane stepped forward. "Your Eminence, I've been filing regular reports. Verdun's agricultural output has increased by 40%. Crime has dropped to nearly zero. Educational enrollment has tripled. By every measurable metric, this world is thriving." "I read your reports," Maltose said quietly. "I didn't believe them. I thought you were exaggerating to protect the boy. So I came to see for myself." Jake's heart was pounding. This was it. The moment everything either continued or fell apart. The Emperor turned back to him. "You've done something I didn't think was possible, Jake Miller. You've proven that a conquered world, given freedom and support, will flourish on its own. This troubles me greatly." "Why?" Jake asked, finding his voice. "Because it means I've been wrong. For 2 centuries I've built an empire on the belief that strength means domination. That inferior species need superior ones to guide them. That peace comes through force." Malthose's expression was impossible to read. "You've shown me a different way. And now I don't know what to do with that knowledge." The plaza was so quiet Jake could hear the fountain water trickling. Then the Emperor did something that shocked everyone. He sat down on the edge of the fountain, making himself smaller, less intimidating. It was such a human gesture that Jake almost laughed. "Tell me how you did this," Maltose said. "Truly. No politics, no diplomacy. Just the truth." Jake sat down beside him, ignoring his mother's sharp intake of breath. Crystal settled behind them, her massive form a comforting presence. It wasn't that complicated, Jake said. I just asked the Verdans what they needed and then helped them get it. We formed the council so they could make their own decisions. Earth sent teachers and engineers who actually wanted to help, not control. And when the storm came, everyone worked together because they all wanted the same thing. To survive. To protect their families. But you guided them. You coordinated the response to the tempest. I helped organize, sure. But the Verdans did the actual work. They remembered how to build the shelters. They knew their planet better than any outsider ever could. I just gave them the chance to use that knowledge. Maltose was quiet for a long moment. What you're describing is the opposite of everything the Empire represents. Yeah, Jake agreed. But which system works better? That question hung in the air. Finally the Emperor stood. The crowd tensed, waiting for his judgment. I'm making a decision that will change the Empire forever, Maltose announced, his voice carrying across the plaza. When your year ends, Jake Miller, I will formally grant Verdun complete independence. Full sovereignty, protected status, equal standing with any imperial world. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Thora's hands flew to her mouth. But, the Emperor continued, I'm also establishing a new program. A path to autonomy for any conquered world that can demonstrate stable self-governance. Verdun will be the model. You, Jake, will be the proof that it can work. What does that mean? Jake asked. It means this experiment continues. It means I'm asking you to show the galaxy that freedom doesn't lead to chaos. That cooperation is stronger than conquest. Maltose looked tired suddenly, ancient in a way Jake hadn't noticed before. It means you're going to change everything whether you meant to or not. The Emperor left shortly after, but his words stayed behind. Over the next months, Jake watched as the implications spread. 17 worlds submitted applications for the autonomy program. Protest movements started on dozens of others, but they were peaceful protests. The protesters held up pictures of Jake and Crystal, using them as symbols of what was possible. Jake's life became insane. Interview requests from 1,000 planets. Invitations to speak at universities, conferences, government assemblies. Everyone wanted to know how a 12-year-old human had changed an empire that had stood for millennia. But Jake kept his focus on Verdun. He helped the council establish trade agreements with other worlds. He worked with the Thornback Conservation Program, protecting Crystal and her family. He even convinced his parents to let him finish the year there, doing his Earth schoolwork remotely. His sister Katie visited once and she cried when she saw how the Verdun kids treated Jake like he was some kind of hero. You're still my annoying brother, she told him. Don't let this go to your head. Trust me, Jake said, hugging her. I'm way too tired for my head to get big. The year ended on a perfect autumn day Verdun time. The ceremony was simple. Emperor Maltose returned with representatives from across the empire. He formally released all imperial claims to Verdun in front of thousands of witnesses and billions watching across the galaxy. Jake signed a document transferring all authority to the Verdun Council. His hand shook a little as he wrote his name, thinking about how much had changed since that day in the courtyard. That's it? He asked Thora. We just signed papers? She smiled, tears streaming down her green face. That's it. We're free. The celebration lasted 3 days. Music filled the streets. People danced and cried and laughed. Jake spent most of it trying to avoid being carried on people's shoulders and just hanging out with Crystal and her cubs. She'd had 3 babies during the year, and Jake had named them Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald. They were the size of large dogs now, playful and curious and completely unafraid of humans. On the last night before Jake returned to Earth, he stood in the plaza where everything had started. Crystal lay beside him, her cubs wrestling nearby. The stars were bright overhead, more stars than he could see from Colorado because of how clear Verdun's atmosphere was. You know what's weird? Jake said to Crystal, scratching behind her ear. I just wanted to help one hurt animal. That's all. And somehow that turned into freeing an entire planet and changing an empire. Crystal made her rumbling purr sound, pushing her head against his hand. I'm gonna miss you, Jake whispered. But you belong here. This is your home. The next morning, as Jake's family prepared to board the transport back to Earth, Emperor Maltose appeared one last time. 6 worlds have already achieved autonomy, he told Jake. 20 more are in the application process. In 10 years it might be 100. You've set something in motion that can't be stopped. Good, Jake said firmly. Indeed. The Emperor's expression softened slightly. When you're older, if you ever want to work in galactic diplomacy, I suspect you'd be exceptional at it. Maybe, Jake admitted. But right now I just want to go home, see my dog and sleep in my own bed for like a week straight. Maltose actually laughed at that. Jake hugged Thora goodbye, promised to stay in touch with the council, and gave Crystal one last long embrace. Then he boarded the transport with his parents and watched Verdun grow smaller through the viewport. His mom put her arm around his shoulders. You did something amazing, honey. You should be proud. I just helped, Jake said. The Verduns did the real work. That's what makes you special, his dad said. You understand that leadership isn't about controlling people. It's about empowering them. 5 years later, Jake stood at a podium in the Galactic Assembly. He was 17 now, taller, his voice deeper, but he still had that same determined look. I'm not a politician, he told the assembled representatives from 600 worlds. 5 years ago, I was just a kid who didn't want to watch an animal suffer. But that one choice changed everything. It showed all of us that compassion isn't weakness. It's the strongest force in the universe. The screens behind him showed images of Verdun thriving. Of 43 worlds that had achieved freedom. Of thornbacks, once hunted as monsters, now protected across a dozen planets. Be the change you want to see, Jake continued. Not by forcing others but by inspiring them. Show people what's possible. And trust me, when you do that, you don't just change yourself. You change everything. The applause was deafening. After the speech, Jake's parents were waiting. His mom hugged him tight. Can we go home now? Jake asked. Katie's science project is due Monday and I promised I'd help. His parents laughed and together they headed for the transport bay. Behind them, across 600 worlds, people were learning that one person's compassion could spark a revolution. That treating others with dignity and respect was more powerful than any weapon. And it all started because a 12-year-old boy saw a creature in pain and decided to help instead of running away.